Zach with Wingard Wearables. You're a special person because you're one of the 12 people that's going to watch this video to the end. And today's video is slightly less special because it's kind of a rerun of a video we did 2 videos back. We were talking about Jack Vargo, my mentor, and the lessons that he taught me and how they apply to Wingard Wearables. But our sound quality was so terrible that people were telling me they were refusing to listen to it because they couldn't hear anything. And they were frustrated by that, and then they were asking us, hey, can you refilm this? So we are, and since we don't script anything, the content will not be the same. This is essentially a new video. You can go back and watch the old one if you got really good headphones on. I think one of my cats interrupted the video really badly, so you can check that out. But today's video, Jack Vargo, he was my mentor. I called him up in 2016, had lots of questions about spike tomahawks. Wingard Wearables was not a thing then. At the time, I was focused on how to figure out making tomahawks for concealed carry, and I wanted to research historic spike tomahawks because these were battle-proven weapons and they were way lighter than what's on the market today. So I wanted to understand the historic background. I had bought Vargo's book on the spike tomahawk and read it cover to cover, and there was a lot of missing material from my perspective, as a weapon designer. And so Vargo graciously spent many, many hours mentoring me. Unfortunately, he passed away last April. But this video, I just wanted to cover what things he taught me, from a perspective of a historic blacksmith and how that applies to Wingard Wearables today. So Vargo was in upstate New York. Historically, that was in a region under the influence of the Iroquois Confederation. And the Iroquois were probably the top users of the spike tomahawk. Most spike tomahawks that have been found archaeologically are in the region of, upstate New York area. And one of the fascinating things is spike tomahawks are unique compared to other tomahawk styles. Because spike tomahawks were almost all of them hand-forged on the frontier. And this was pre-industrial age. Everything was hand-forged. It's almost uncommon to find 2 spike tomahawks of the same design. And so, these weren't made over in Europe and shipped in. They were used as tools and weapons. They were primarily favored by Native American warriors. But there are a couple of reasons for that. It's not just that the spike is so effective as a tool and a weapon, but it's also the shape of the tomahawk head lends itself to many different ways of taking advantage of scrap materials. This is pre-industrial age. You did not order stock metal from Speedy Metals to be delivered to your door so you could start hand forging it. You had to take wrought iron and bits of steel that were scrapped around you and figure out how to make a spike tomahawk that a warrior wanted. And sometimes that required sandwiching 2 thin pieces of metal and forging them together. Other times it required drilling an eye or splitting an eye. There were just so many different ways that you could do it. Blacksmiths, from French regions of influence, from British regions of influence, there were just so many of them, often living with the tribes, serving them, doing it not just for trade, but diplomacy, because you wanted that tribe on your side to use basically as auxiliary, troops in warfare. So blacksmiths played an important role on the frontier. For the most part, the Native American tribes had no metalworking skills. They did not have gunsmiths. And so this blacksmith who would live near or alongside your tribe was really Mr. Fix-It on a lot of these things. And tomahawks needed a lot of repairs. You guys, probably all watched Last of the Mohicans. Magua, his tomahawk, so iconic. They picked, that was a real tomahawk that existed. And I'll have a link about that in the comment section below. But that's an example of a tomahawk that was hand-forged on the frontier that was terrible. It had all kinds of flaws in it because scrap metal can have compromises in it structurally. And so quality varied all over the place. Skill level of the blacksmiths varied all over the place. You really couldn't count on the mechanical properties of the material that you forged because everything was sourced from scrap. And oftentimes these would get damaged and repaired. People have the idea that tomahawks are these unbreakable tools, and they aren't, especially when they have to be made as thin to be lightning fast as these guys were. And they were light not just as weapons, but to use efficiently small bits of scrap material that you had available. And Vargo took that mindset to his business, which he started in the 1990s. So he would source his scrap metal. He used mostly spring steel from Humvees that had been scrapped. And so he would hand forge these tomahawk heads from Humvee springs. And about the only thing he didn't do that was not historical, I think I said that correctly, he did use a belt sander for finishing these heads. He started his business when well into his middle ages, so we can, understand that, hey, he's going to save his hand strength by doing belt sanding finish. But other than that, they were made out of steel, so they were a lot stronger than the historic tomahawks that were usually wrought iron with a little steel edge, if they had that even. He did make them thicker than a number of the historic examples that he had access to because he was selling them as products to be used. And he also really favored splitting and spreading the eye. And I have seen pictures close up of this example in particular, and the eye was not done that way in the historic piece. It was it appeared to have been drilled, and the cheeks were not football shaped. They were flat on both sides, and you actually see that on a number of spiked tomahawk designs. There's evidence that those were used as a percussive hammer face to drive in stakes, or even a little anvil face, to do little bushcraft and camp chores on. So his designs don't have those flat cheeks that you see on some of the examples, but they are beautiful and they are very functional. And he taught me a lot on how these things were assembled and how they were speculated to have been used or known to have been used. One of the things that fascinated me was the science of wedging. Spiked tomahawks, unlike what most people think of with tomahawks, you did not drop the handle down, drop to the top, and friction fit it. These were, almost all of them were wedged like an axe. And he was old school. He would harvest ash or hickory or even hop hornbeam billets and season them for 1 to 2 years. They would be air dried before he would get them on a sawhorse and get a draw knife and a rasp and then rough out the handle. And he did not use sandpaper on the handles either. Sandpaper is not historical. He would scrape the wood with a razor blade until it was a smooth surface. And the wedges he used came from the same billet the handle was made from. And one of the important things he taught me that we use in our Backripper Tomahawks today, you don't want any metal wedge on your tomahawk. I have seen a lot of modern makers who make the wedged wooden handled tomahawk use a metal wedge. You don't want to ever do that. The reason for that is wood has natural shrinkage and expansion at different moisture levels, and metal in the wedge has a natural shrinkage and expansion at different temperature levels. And a metal wedge will inevitably work loose, actually rather quickly, especially if it's made in a hot, humid environment like Arkansas in the summer, and then a customer gets his tomahawk in Canada in the winter. That head will get loose instantly when it's taken out of the box. Metal wedges are great for tools you use in your workshop when you have a vise and hammers and that sort of thing to retighten them on the spot. But they are terrible to use in a bushcraft tool or in a weapon where the head might get loose out in the field when you need it to work the most. So always use wooden wedges with your tomahawks, preferably the same wood from the same handle material, which is what we do with our Backripper Tomahawks. We have hickory wedges from the same tree that was used for the handle. Yeah, so he was really old school, and he was my mentor, and he was a subject matter expert. But one of the things that I did learn through working with him, and also just others, just life experiences I've had as a mechanical engineer, subject matter experts, when they're talking about something they've had direct experience with, they are right 95% of the time. When they're talking about something they've never done before, and they're giving you advice on that, they're right about half the time. And Vargo, when I introduced the idea of, the Backripper Tomahawk, carrying this inside the waistband, that sort of thing, he told me it would not work. He told me the angled head would not work either. They would be unstable, that the handle would not move with the hip, that sort of thing. And, that he was wrong, but that's because he had no experience ever making a tomahawk to do that. And that's fine. I knew that was something he hadn't done before, and so I chose to forge on ahead, and fortunately it worked very well. We have taken, we try to use modern methods wherever we can to save time and save cost to pass on to the customer. What's amazing to me is that Vargo was selling these tomahawks, which were entirely handmade by him, for $225 to $250. I know he had pipe tomahawks that were $1,200 and up. They were really fancy, but to me it was incredible that he charged so little for that. And a little bit is that frontier blacksmith mindset. Time was really cheap back then in the pre-industrial age. Everyone was working 14-hour days and laboring everything by hand. I remember requesting this tomahawk to be file branded, and the method he used to file brand was just like they used to. He would heat up just the tip of the file and press it in by hand to burn in each of these individual rings. This 16-inch long handle took him 2 hours to file brand. He charged me $5 extra for doing that. That's crazy. So, that was really eye-opening to me. We file brand our Backripper Tomahawks. Like, old files are cheap, so we cut ours up into bits and we threw them in, an improvised kiln, and we just swap between the hot bits of file and can press 75 file brandings into this in minutes instead of 2 hours. But he was doing it the historic way. Steel was more valuable than time. He could not tear apart a file and heat up all of it and use it, because that would ruin the file. It would ruin the file's temper. So he really did apply things in the historic way, which was just incredible. But for us, we've done research, and despite what some people say, air-dried wood and properly kiln-dried wood have no mechanical difference. So we do not go out and harvest wood billets and wait 2 years for them to season. We do use kiln-dried hickory. It's in the proper grain orientation. It is just as strong as air-dried. If you guys are familiar with the Bowyer Bibles series, they did extensive research on board bows, as in bows that were made out of boards, kiln-dried boards, and they found no mechanical property difference either. And that was subjected to much more stress than tomahawk handles are. You aren't like bending the tomahawk handles like you're shooting bending a bow and that sort of thing. So yeah, we take modern steps where we can. For instance, our handles are CNC machined close to the net shape, but we still use rasp and hand scraped finish. We don't sand our handles because we want more textured grip. I've talked about the wedging already. We have to individually sculpt the tenon section to the hand forged heads. Our blacksmiths use a power hammer where they can, but it is all hand forged. They do use speedy metals to order, a known mechanical property, material property, steel. So we aren't using scrap steel. And really, people have a mistaken impression of hand forging and traditional blacksmithing. They often think it's like, an artisan thing. It's like this inefficient, bygone era that has no real place in the modern industrial age. And that is wrong when it comes to our products. We design ergonomic weapons. And ergonomic body-conforming weapons are a three-dimensional design. So when you look at our Backripper Tomahawk and you see the curve of that spike, which is critical for when you're sitting down in a modern car seat with this inside the waistband of your pants, that curve has to be hand forged and bent. You have to move the metal, not remove the metal. If you started with a piece of steel this thick and put it in a milling machine to try to attempt to make this shape, you might be able to do it. It would be very expensive. Removing all that material doesn't just cost you in the loss of material, it costs you in the time to remove it and the skill and the machines to remove it. So really hand forging the Backripper Tomahawk head is the most efficient way to do it. The quill, that is curled to fit behind the ear, to accommodate all kinds of different combative grips. This would be very inefficient to make with stock removal, especially with the diamond cross section and the curl. You'd be losing a lot of material. You'd be losing a ton of time attempting to make this. And definitely the most dramatic example of what hand forging buys you is our micropipe multi-tool. This is 5 inches of curve. This is a 15-inch piece of 01 tool steel that is curved to conform to your body, and it comfortably wears. It's even more comfortable to carry than our Backripper Tomahawks. But if you made that with stock removal, oh gosh, even if you attempted to stack them, that would be such an enormous waste of time and material and effort. This is definitely, making a jig and hand forging it and moving that metal is just so much more efficient. And so our product lines today, all of them are ergonomically designed, and all of them benefit off of curves. Most knives are flat. You are in that 2D design space. You're designing in flat space, stock removal all the way. The most efficient. It's really hard to think of knife designs that have to be hand forged. But when you try to make a body conforming weapon, there is a third dimension in that. There is a curve that's required. And that takes you out of that 2D flat space. That takes you out of the stock removal realm. And it forces you to consider other methods of manufacture, and hand forging really does have a place in the modern day with our designs in particular, and in the modern everyday carry community. I'm trying to think of anything else I should cover. What time are we at on the video? Oh my gosh, and my wife yawned too right before she said that. So this was probably a boring rerun video. You think it was okay? It was okay. We're going to end it. You're a special person because you're one of the 12 that sat through this whole thing. And please share it so there could be a special 13th person out there. Be edgy.